abuses of international human rights and humanitarian law since November 2020. We have reasonable grounds to believe that many of these acts amount to war crimes. We have also reasonable grounds to believe that the federal government and its allies have committed crimes against humanity in Tigray region. Some of these crimes are ongoing.
And able to do so. You need a conducive security environment. And the best way to get to that is, of course, agreeing for cessation of hostilities, to work out the modalities of how services should be restored. And that should be done in short order. And that's what we have been urging. Again, I can't say this enough. There is no military solution to this conflict. And the sooner both parties recognize that, the sooner that we will be on a better track towards peace.
Hello everyone, welcome to MD Media's weekly show, The H Panel. The H Panel starts now. Today we'll be talking about Geneva, Washington, Addis Ababa, accountability, mediation, and war. The full panel is back, and we'll be waiting for the insight from H Panel today. So Mike Hammer, the special envoy for the Horn of Africa, he gave briefing on his visit to the Horn, to the region, between September 4th and September 16th. And this week also witnessed the report, the first initial findings of the International Commission for Human Rights experts in Ethiopia. And we will be also covering that and the reaction from the different parties. And welcome, gentlemen. And we'll start with the highlights of the week for each panelist. Faisal, can you start off with what stood out for you this week?
Yes, well, I think we'll come back to this subject, and this is probably the one that captured world attention as well as people who are interested in this subject matter. So we'll come back to that. But two small local things that captured my attention in the Somali region. One is the cancellation of the Ethiopian government concerning the contract that it had for a long time with the Chinese Poly GCL company that was supposed to help Ethiopia exploit what is called the Ogaden oil gas. And suddenly we learned that the Ethiopian government decided to cancel that contract and switch loyalty from Chinese to whoever is willing to buy. And as you can quote here from Rashid Abdi, who says he has heard or gained some information from reliable sources. Yes, the Chinese refused to probably live up to what Ethiopia wanted to. In general, this contract between the two sides for the years have had a lot of problems. I will just cite three things that need to be remembered. Whoever replaces the Chinese group, these three major issues must be taken into account. Number one, in 2007-2008, the Ogaden National Liberation Front, which struggles for the liberation of the Somali region, ambushed the oil fields and killed about 10 Chinese contractors and other Ethiopian soldiers who were manning the area. And that really put this whole Ogaden oil into the world attention. It was then that the US got interested in this issue, and Jeffrey Gentleman, I believe, who was at the time a correspondent for the New York Times, wrote significant literature on both this issue and the Ogaden National Liberation Front's struggle for its determination. So that's number one. It's an issue that really characterizes the struggle of the people of that region. That's number one. Number two, if and when these resources are exploited, we have to expect humongous, life-threatening environmental disaster. There had never been an environmental impact report to the standard that's required for such a massive infrastructural oil development. The plans that I have seen do not meet World and as well as United Nations environmental assessment level. In addition to the fact that if and when this thing is exploited, it will go through two landscapes that are important to the Somali people. It will go through a pastoral region, which would definitely and negatively impact the grazing lands of the Somalis between Jigjiga and Dagahbur and that area. Number two, the pipes will also cross through the only agricultural fields that the Somali region have, which is north of Jigjiga all the way until you get Shinile and Redawa. So huge environmental impact must be expected in the era when we are talking about climate change and the West wants to help the third world in terms of climate issues. Here we are contributing to the degradation of an already strained environmental terrain of the Somali region. And third, the last issue about this oil is we are afraid as Somalis that this would be a cursed gift given to the Somalis. They may not benefit, number one, and number two, it could create some social tension within the Somalis along clan lines. So this is resources that is mismanaged, and that mismanagement can negatively impact our people. And we are very, very weary, and Somalis have been keeping an eye on these resources since the 1940s. The first exploration were done by the United States, American companies, as well as some British companies, and Somalis have always been edgy and unhappy. And one of the things that really fans Somali nationalism in this area is their inability to control their resources. We don't want to see here what happened in Nigeria. We don't want to see the Sarajevo syndrome taking place in the Somali region, and that is very possible given the autocratic nature of the Ethiopian government. The last one I would mention about that region is that the PP chapter of the Somali region tried to assemble a consultative meeting between PP, the Ogaden National Liberation Front, and Freedom and Equality Party and others, including intellectuals and as well as elders and traditional leaders. That didn't materialize because PP were known to have had already an undercurrent and hidden agenda. The conference was supposed to take place between tomorrow, the 23rd, all the way to the 25th. It didn't go through. ONLF decided not to participate, and all other parties didn't. And as of today, this afternoon, I get the news that the president of the Freedom and Equality Party, which is a nationwide party but has a Somali chapter, said while he was meeting with the president and the leaders of that region, his offices were ransacked and all the computers and documents were taken out, and he gave a press conference in their afternoon, which means yesterday their time, our time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Faisal, for that highlight. Duke, what stood out for you this week?
Yeah, well, there were so many things. The invasion, the new offensive from Eritrea was big. The release of the report. I mean, of course, I'm always focused on the humanitarian situation in Tigray, which they released a report yesterday. The World Food, not the World Food Program, but the Food Cluster put out their weekly update. If you'll recall, last week they fed 1.5 million people in Tigray, which was a remarkable feat. This week it was about half that, but there were three real issues to look at this week that were very frightening. You know, as we discussed, the food distribution can't be sustained without more food coming into Tigray. Of the about 750,000 people, I think it was 746,000 people, about 70% only got a partial food basket. These food baskets are supposed to last for 6 weeks. If you don't get a full food basket, it doesn't last for that full 6 weeks. A lot of people, about 500,000 people only got wheat and cooking oil, and about 5,000 people just got a sack of wheat, which is impossible to imagine that you are in a community that's starving. Starvation is rampant in Tigray. That's what we learned from the food security assessment. And you get 1 sack of wheat, and that's supposed to last you and your family. The second issue is they're running out of gas. They have about 70,000 liters of fuel left amongst the partners. It's not known how far that will take them, but it certainly will not finish the food distribution round that they have right now. They need about another 200,000 liters of gas to do that. The third very serious challenge is that in the beginning of September, there were 4 districts along the Eritrean border that were inaccessible to humanitarian aid. Now there are 8. Most of the area along the border with Eritrea, near the border with Eritrea, is now inaccessible to food aid. And of course, occupied West Tigray is also inaccessible to food aid. So that they are distributing the food that they have, they're running out of food, they're running out of gas, and the other layer of the blockade that happens in the occupied areas of Tigray is back in effect, and that area is growing, and that's very frightening. And the problem that we see is that there has been nobody that has been willing to say precisely what's going on. We keep hearing about conflict blocking food. This isn't conflict blocking food. I mean, you can make the argument that this is a specific tactic that's blocking food, and that's weaponized starvation. That's what's being used against the civilians of Tigray right now.
Thank you, Duke. Talking about weaponized starvation, I think we'll talk about the report from the international experts, which mentioned that Ethiopia has used starvation as a weapon in the war on Tigray. Professor Scale, what stood out for you this week?
What stood out for me is what was just alluded to. That is basically the obvious one. That is the fact that Eritrea decided to launch an all-out war against Tigray. That's not surprising. That's not surprising that Eritrea eventually decided to move into Tigray from the north. That was expected. There are some issues that would have made me doubt that Eritrea would decide to go into Tigray. But what is really surprising to me is the decision by the Ethiopian government and the fashion that the Ethiopian government used to invite Eritrea into Tigray, and how the politicos and Ethiopians actually reacted to this situation. Something is really amiss. Something is really not right with that country. Eritrea is an enemy. Only short 30 years ago, Ethiopia fought a war with Eritrea in which 100,000 Ethiopians were killed. For 30 years, that area never had peace because of Eritrea. This time, at least the Ethiopians, they pride themselves that when an external enemy comes, they pull together, set their differences aside, and confront the enemy. And they are really, Ethiopians are proud that they repeatedly defeated outside aggression. Why that history would be thrown away for many, many Ethiopians is just not making sense to me these days. Because the first time Eritrea was invited in, or Eritrea invited itself in, because the Tigray Defense Forces allegedly fired missiles on Asmara. That was the pretext for the war. This time, the Ethiopian government is trying to, and this is the rationale for the war, the Ethiopian government is trying to liberate Tigray from TPLF domination. Then what purpose does Eritrea have invading Tigray if the Ethiopian government is really trying to liberate the Tigrayan youth and the Tigrayan people from TPLF domination? Why would Eritrea be invited into this, and why would Eritrea accept? What is surprising to me is that the first time that Eritrea even went into it, let me say a couple of things about that, went into the Tigray war. Number one, Eritrea never went to the front line to engage the Tigrayans. Eritrea always follows the Ethiopians. On the northern side, it's only after the Ethiopian forces from Shiraro, from Wikro area came and descended on Mekelle that Eritrea got into Tigray, took the whole area from north of extending from Addis Ababa to Adigrat, and they killed, maimed, removed everything that they could remove, burned down what they could not remove, destroyed infrastructure, destroyed Tigray. North of that road that was from Addis Ababa to Adigrat. They did that after, but the brunt of the casualties were carried by the Ethiopians. Eritrea only comes afterwards, not to assist Ethiopia in the war against TDF, but to loot, to kill, to destroy. That's what it's coming for. They were not helping with Tigray. They were just looting Tigray and killing Tigray and avenging his anger. That's what he was doing. Secondly, for doing that, he was paid to the tune of $500 million by Ethiopians. And then they lost the war. Why does Ethiopia need Eritrea again? And exactly what they did before, they did this week on the Afar side. The front line was manned by Amhara forces. The second line was Afar forces. The third line was the Ethiopian National Defense Forces that Abiy wanted to save quite a little bit. And Eritrea was the fourth. Only with the their mechanized brigades, so that they can come close to Tigray and then lob artillery shells on Mekelle. That's what they're coming for. That's what they're doing. And to do this, Ethiopia transported an entire division to Eritrea so that Eritrea could use these as a human shield. This is surprising. The military, the Ethiopian military, the military generals, these are the people who actually received their first battle experience fighting with the Eritreans on the side of Tigrayans. Now they are on the side of Eritreans to fight with their own comrades of the Ethio-Eritrean war. This is unbelievable. Why this is happening, why Ethiopia is allowing this, even when Eritrea is not really assisting them in the battle against TDF, is quite surprising. But the entire thing, the charade is that this is the first time that an enemy, Ethiopia's enemy, an avowed enemy, was invited to fight against its own citizens. This time, Ethiopia is using another country's territory to kill its own citizens for no reason. This is the first in Ethiopian history, and they will go down as Abiy's legacy. It's a weird situation, but this is really what is surprising. This is what is happening in Ethiopia. Something is really awry in Ethiopia. Something is really wrong in Ethiopia, and this is an emblematic of what is wrong entirely with Ethiopia.
Okay, thank you, Skia. So that brings us to the topic of the day. So we chose these three capitals: Geneva, Washington, Addis Ababa. We can add Mekelle. We can add other capitals as well. It is about the report that came out it was released the text on Monday, and then it was presented yesterday with the chair giving briefing, and followed by a situation report as well presented at the UN General Assembly. So let's hear what the chair said briefly, and I want to hear from you what you make of what happened in Geneva, Washington, and Addis Ababa's reaction, and Mekelle's response to all this.
Our report finds reasonable grounds to believe that parties to the conflict have committed serious violations and abuses of international human rights and humanitarian law since November 2020. We have reasonable grounds to believe that many of these acts amount to war crimes. We have also reasonable grounds to believe that the federal government and its allies have committed crimes against humanity in Tigray region. Some of these crimes are ongoing.
I just want to remind our viewers that the commission was established in December 2021, and Ethiopia opposed its establishment. Then back in March 2022, there was a fund request, and Ethiopia again submitted a text opposing the funding of the commission, and it didn't make it because most countries support the funding. And in July, when the commission visited Ethiopia, as reported, it was denied access. One thing that is interesting is when Redwan Hussein, the National Security Advisor of the Prime Minister, on July 28, he tweeted that he announced it to the commission, that was in Addis at that time, to be allowed for a round trip to Magala. And this part of the tweet that is on the screen, the second part, was removed immediately within hours. And sources told UMD Media that this happened after the Prime Minister warned Redwan while he said that they are allowed to go to Magala. So that was reported as well in Geneva in terms of no access to Tigray and other parts of Ethiopia outside Addis Ababa. Let's start with Faisal. How did you read all this happening in Geneva, Washington, and Addis?
Well, I think the Human Rights Commission came up with a report that's by more or less, reflective of what happened in the region. I think they have detailed, although this is a preliminary draft report, it details the systemic crimes that have been exacted against civilians, mainly in Tigray. They mention in one section that TDF also committed some crimes in Kobo and Chencha area, but the bulk of the report, really, I would say more than 90% of the report, indicts the Ethiopian government, Eritrean government, as well as groups that are affiliated with the Ethiopian government. The report also talks in detail about the methods of war crimes exacted against the people of Tigray, including, weaponized rape, what they call de facto blockade, which is using food as a weapon to starve people to death, which is a high-level form of crime. That report also details the unnecessary and criminal bombardment of civilian population centers such as Makale or IDP centers populated by people of Tigray who run away from the conflict. It is really a damning report, if you will. And the report organizers and drafters also recognize the precarious situation in which Ethiopia is. Actually, when you read the report, you can see the alarming feelings that that they had when they were preparing this report. And they say in so many words, so many places, that this is a very frightening condition in terms of what's happening in Ethiopia. I think I was very fascinated and also impressed by the report to have recognized that civilian killing and civilian bombardment in the hands of Ethiopian army started before 2020, before the Tigray war. It locates the genesis of killing civilians by the Ethiopian government in Oromia in 2019. And that is also an indication that, although they don't go in detail what had happened in Oromia, but that, the Tigray war was the apex of a government that was at war with its people. I think, everything that we have been discussing for the last few years, the report carries. What's very interesting is that the report is to be adapted. Some of the countries that are lined up to oppose the report are again an alarming subject we need to focus. Countries that are supposedly siding with Ethiopia are North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, I think Russia, your typical non-democratic, if you will, governments are lined up to support Ethiopia's side to deny this report to be adapted. The EU completely adapted the spirit of the report and stands by it, and I'm sure the US and the rest would. So I think this is probably a setup and a precursor to establishing the tools and the infrastructure for going after perpetrators, particularly, I would say, Ethiopian leaders. I think at this point in time, Abiy and company need to know that they have no hiding point. The legalistic words and concept that is used in the report sets the sort of the process and procedures for going after these leaders for crimes against humanity and war crimes. And I don't think they can hide, they can deny. The Ethiopian government would refuse to accept it, but this is a record that will be haunting them for a long time. If I just add one more in terms of Washington's spirit, I think Washington is confused. I honestly believe that starting from Samantha Power's unfeminist quotation and reference to the Ethiopian ambassador's polemic phrases about hunger and her infatuation with his words, and Mike Hammer's lukewarm message when he returned from there, as well as Blinken's really rhetorical, if you will, crying from the heart of a racist, in my opinion, for the European side, and completely neglecting the dying black people. America is in a sort of confused political situation when it comes to the Horn of Africa. Either these people don't care about African lives, or they completely become students of realpolitik, that the hell with people who die, hooray to governments that we want to befriend. This kind of concept is not new to America. It's a country that was in cahoots with Franco of Philippines, Mobutu of Zaire, and many embarrassing leaders. I think if the US government doesn't change its course to handle the situation in Ethiopia, America will lose its leadership morally as well as politically. Yes, I quoted what he said about Ukraine, which I 100% agree. The secretary said that if Ukraine stops the fighting, they will end. But if Russia stops the fighting, the war will end. In the same token, I argue that if Abiy and Ethiopia stops the fighting, the war would end. If Tigray stops the war, the fighting, Tigray would end. Why he wouldn't add the same thing is the racist element I'm sensing. As a student of Afro-American studies, I am sensitive to what powerful men say about black issues, and here it's very clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. I think the WHO Director General was also a couple of times mentioning about how the world is seeing the Ukraine-Russia versus the Tigray-Ethiopia war in terms of that racist lens. Scale, let me go to you. And we heard that the Prime Minister, in a meeting with the military and political leaders of the country, he warned them that if we are not continuing with this war, and if Tigray wins, every single of you would be jailed. So this is not Abiy's war only. And he even mentioned about how rule of law or history is always for the victor, for those who win. So with that in light, and with Mike Hammer's briefing in Washington after maybe a couple of weeks in Addis, what are you reading? You can also comment on what happened in Geneva.
I think with regard to what happened in Geneva, let me simply highlight a few things about what I read into the report. The first thing is, even though the expert committee bemoaned that they did not have enough time to do the job because of the time constraint that was given to them, that they did not have the staff that they would need to do a comprehensive investigation and collection of information, and they did not have access to a number of places. So they actually said that they needed more time. So they were forced to select. So what we saw here, even though it is really comprehensive in terms of the areas of violations of international humanitarian law, international human rights law, international criminal law, international law governing refugees, and laws of war itself, even though they really touched on a number of areas and all the areas that would probably be looked at in the future. These are selections. So what we saw, selections of areas of crime, at least for instance, if it is about drone strikes, they selected a couple of places. It's about aggression, they selected a couple of places. What they gave us is really a glimpse, the tip of the iceberg of the violations of all of these categories of international law, which they were mandated to study. This is simply a glimpse. It just gives you a sense. It's not comprehensive enough. It doesn't cover anything because of the restrictions and constraints on their work. They also made a point saying that this is our initial view with regard to the violations, and advised that they would give us recommendations. This is just an initial view, it's an initial conclusions. So there is really more to come. If there is time and the funding and the expertise and the staff, we will be in for a surprise that it would not ever know the magnitude of what happened in Ethiopia in the last 4 years under Abiy Ahmed. Saying that, I think the proposal, their findings and their recommendations and the conclusions are right on the mark, and anybody that reads it very closely could see that really violations where it is possible that some kind of prosecutions, because these are violations of international law, there should be sanctions and remedies. If all goes well, and if there is time, or when the time comes, there will be a lot of accountability. So they hinted at that, the area of transitional justice and accountability, they hinted at some remedies. But in any case, this is the system that we have, the architecture of world governance that we have. So within that, we will see ups and downs, but what we saw here is basically the tip of the iceberg of the violations and the violence that had been perpetrated in Ethiopia. Of course, if I could use that as a segue to the question that you asked me, indeed, the Prime Minister spoke, I think, before the report was issued. He was actually addressing the military. First, he spoke to the military brass, and he delivered his lecture in his vintage hyperbolic style to the military brass. He prefaced his lecture with his usual braggadocio that Ethiopia cannot be defeated, Ethiopia has never been defeated in her history, that Ethiopia will repeat again another victory that would surprise the world. Now, let me start with what I heard about his demeanor, that he appeared to have a mixture of emotions. He was tense and angry, despondent, and also confident at the same time that Ethiopia will prevail over this conflict. He seems particularly irritated, from the reports that I have, that particularly irritated at the statement that the Tigrayan government put out. For what reason, I don't know, but he in his speech, he said that they're preaching peace to us when they are losing the war. I don't know where he gets this idea, but that's what he's saying. Why are they preaching peace to us when they're losing the war? Why are they claiming the high ground? I think he was irritated because the statement kind of stole the thunder that he was expecting to get from winning the war, from his plan to attack Tigray from all sides, assuming that Tigray had already been weakened, the will to fight is not there, that they would surrender, there is division amongst themselves, they don't have sufficient military arsenal to resist Ethiopia. But in any case, even if we lose the first wave, we will never lose the first wave because we have an inexhaustible supply of personnel and logistics. He said that to them. Now, he was incensed, at least what he's saying is that the statement that the Tigray government put out, accepting all kinds of conditions to engage in a peace process, he said that was dictated to them by the Americans. It was the penmanship was basically attributed to the Americans who wrote the statement or dictated the statement to the Tigrayans, and he said that the world accepted it, the UN accepted it instantaneously, the EU and everybody accepted it because the Americans wrote this peace and then distributed it, and he berated or admonished the United States and the United Nations for instantly commending the Tigrayans and endorsing their statement, a statement he noted was not even supported by the TPLF Executive Committee and Central Committee. Now, having said that, having dismissed the peace proposal, he said we have to go to war. We have to win this war. Because he said this is an existential war for us, he said. An existential war for Ethiopia, an existential war for his government, an existential war for all officers. He said if Tigray won, it would be the end of Ethiopia, the end of Prosperity Party, and end of our administration, and the end of all of you. He made it personal. So after saying that we have an option now, an opportunity now to write history, because history is written by victors, that they have the opportunity. So now go ahead and go out and do about 6 things that he gave as an assignment to both the political and the military. They go out and raise logistics, material logistics, finance for the war, blood donations, propaganda to mobilize people, recruitment, and finally raising the morale of the people, about 6 categories. He did that. The next morning, the political operatives fanned out to all of Ethiopia, to the lowest level of government, and now they are doing exactly the 6 points that he gave directives on. So that is basically what happened in that meeting.
Great. Thank you, Uzgal. One of the points was about the funding. So I think within 2 or 3 days, we saw the Ministry of Education posting this on its social media, where they say, Ministry of Education, its sectors, and Ethiopian public universities have donated about 211 million birr for the victorious Ethiopian Defense Forces. And some are questioning whether this includes funding from World Bank, because we have seen millions of dollars supported the education sector over the past 2-3 years, including a recent one from World Bank, the Norwegian embassy or Norwegian government, USAID, including UNICEF. So some are questioning whether this would be how the donor funding is being used. Duke, what is your take on the report, Mike Hammer's briefing in Washington? UMD was part of that briefing, but we didn't get a chance to ask questions. We sent in 3 questions in advance, and I think there was a lot to ask, but we didn't get that chance. Duke, back to you.
Yeah, the report was it was remarkable. For what they were able to do with what they had was remarkable. They had 2 full-time staff. The Ethiopian government tried to block the funding, then tried to block or successfully blocked access to anywhere outside of Addis Ababa once they got to Ethiopia, and immediately denounced the report as biased. I think somebody might have said it was discombobulated, if I could use that word, which probably nobody should. But if you look at the report, you will see that most of what they covered were things that had been covered by NGOs like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the drone strike that hit the IDP camp. I believe it was Amnesty International had already done a report saying that this was a war crime. Some of the sexual violence that you saw, now they added to it. It wasn't just a, copy and paste or anything. They added to it. They had additional interviews. They gave it some additional context. But you could see the traces of the Amnesty International report about sexual violence. You could see the traces of the Human Rights Watch report about the treatment of survivors of sexual violence in Tigray. And you could see sort of that pattern. Now, the new thing that they had in this report that the last report just completely dropped the ball on was the fact that the Ethiopian government is in conjunction with the regional governments of Afar and Amhara have put together a policy to starve people in Tigray, not just to starve them, but to deny them medicine, basic services, communication, financial services, all of this, that this is not just happenstance. For some reason, everybody gets pretty stupid when it comes to putting together all of the different elements of this multifaceted package of policies that Addis has come up with to punish the people of Tigray. Everybody pretends that one thing doesn't link to another and that you can still distribute aid without being able to use the telephone. And it's ridiculous. This report brought it all together. They didn't have to because so many people had ignored it, and I give them a lot of credit for that. Now, of course, the EU and the United States, many of the what I call not the countries that aren't in the sovereignty bloc, sort of gave it some credence. It looks like there could be 2 things that happens. One thing, as Faisal said, this could be something that leads to a framework for pursuing legal action, such as the case as legal action that's happening against Myanmar right now, which is trying to break a barrier there of Myanmar's not a party to the ICC, but a case has been brought against them. This could be leading to that because the language is very specific about denying the ability to survive, and that was of course intentional. And the commissioners actually mentioned that they didn't shirk their responsibility of naming names and calling out the different actors for what they've done. So I think they broke some ground on that. I was disappointed that everybody still used the all sides both sides' rhetoric. The people who were in favor of perhaps continuing the investigation, which we'll see if it gets renewed. I believe it's set to expire in December. If it gets renewed, which it absolutely should, for another year, that would be significant. And certainly if they had enough money for a staff, that would be great as well. But there was a somewhat weak response. It almost seemed like the world was not ready to give up on this. Everybody's doing bad stuff, so we're not going to try to parse it. And Faisal is absolutely right that you will not hear that language with Ukraine. Even the representative for South Korea had said that all sides should agree to unfettered access, humanitarian access. You won't hear all sides being used in the Korean Peninsula. You will hear all sides being used in conflicts that the American public or policymakers or the decision makers in the United States, in Europe, in around the world, and also in the GCC, we are willing to sort of overlook or are willing to make a vague situation. So it was upsetting to me that even after that came out about the humanitarian aid, when somebody was finally able to say it, that it seemed like people were ignoring the reality. Now, the obvious strategy of, making sure everybody knows that, we're all in this together. I remember Assad did that. I remember they tried to do that in Yemen. And that is, that's the strategy he has to make. He has to try to convince people that this is an existential threat to them as well. There's no way for him to get the sort of parity that he needs with Tigray, where it is an existential threat. But this falls apart if he starts losing, because what everybody who hears that knows is that they might not have to go to jail. They might not have to get in trouble if they're the ones that step out, whistleblowers that step out to say, this is horrible what's happening. I want to talk to some people about what's going on. I would need protection, all of these things. There are people who can step out, and if it starts getting very, very obvious that he's losing, I think you'll see some more higher level voices willing to come out and say so, because they know that he's willing to take the country down with him. He's shown that beyond the shadow of a doubt. So I was happy with the report. I was unhappy with the response, of course. And yeah, it seems that Addis is in pretty bad shape when it comes to morale, when it comes to, unlimited resources. I'm not sure. I don't think the Chinese would agree with that, as Faisal was talking about. So it's a challenging situation. And it's very, the sad thing is it's very unstable. It's very difficult to say what's going to happen next there, because everybody's got everything riding on what happens next. And nobody is in this conflict. In Tigray, they're certainly not in this conflict to lose. They can't lose. But Addis is not in this conflict to lose. So I think we'll have to see what happens next.
Thank you, Doc. Talking about response, so the Tigray government as well responded through its external affairs office. And one thing that people are talking about is Tigray, although not agreeing with the details of what happened from the Tigray side, they are saying we cannot blanket, deny some of our members might have done something and so on. So they are saying, Tigray is saying in this release that they would cooperate and they would do everything for a full investigation everywhere done by anyone. So building on that, again, Faisal, how do you see this play out? We are talking about now immediately about renewal of the commission's mandate, time and so on.
So yeah, to the credit of TDF, from the beginning when charges were leveled against it, exactly that's what they said from the beginning, that if our soldier is dead, we will make sure that we collaborate and we find and we will be ready to mitigate whatever happened. Until proven, that's what you would expect a leader in a war to say, and then cooperate and collaborate with the investigation. That's not what the federal government of Ethiopia is doing. So the two have always been different. And basically, we can also reflect that in a war situation, a lot of things happen. But TDF always emphasized it is war with the federal government and its allies as a war that is people's oriented, trying to break the blockade and what have you. Whereas the TDF side, the rhetoric have been always really troubling. And I'm glad the report really mentions the three layers and steps of crimes against humanity or war crimes. First is hate speech, second is hate crime, and then it is the genocide, the rape, what have you. Those three levels have been seen with the Ethiopian side, whether it is Daniel Kibret, the ones that said we made the whole TDF, TPLF like a dust and we threw and into the air. So the Ethiopian side had a build up to even prove that they were on the trajectory of genocide and crimes against humanity. TDF was always saying the other way. I think in all this, and we have been on this for about 2 years, I think what's missing in the equation is the West's lack of leadership in at least giving people a room to breathe. And unfortunately, this happens most of the time, at least in my lifetime and in our career, in a democratic administration. Rwanda happened under the watch of Clinton. Somalia's famine and destruction happened under Aspen, who was the defense minister, secretary of Clinton. Tigray's situation, and for that matter, Ethiopia and Oromia, is happening under a so-called progressive democratic administration. What is wrong with the types of Blinkens and Samantha Powers who have worked for many years in Sudan, who knows exactly the nature of the issue, who is aware of the conflict, the dynamics of the conflict, what goes into women, massacre and challenges and all that. It's not somebody that you can lecture. It's not somebody that we can sit here and lecture. That's where you see the devil took over them, to be honest with you. There is nothing from the get-go. I've always been critical of the United States' role in this. We are not, as people like me who are neutral on the issue, are not asking to take a side. What we are asking is to come up with a methodology and tools to protect civilians in the conflict, be they in Oromia, be they in Tigray, be they in Afar. When people are, starved to death, a leadership like the United States expected to create a system to feed those people, whether that's through air, breaking the blockade, giving ultimatum. Here you have the highest level of State Department flirting with the perpetrators of the crime. And I think that is giving TDF and TPLF, and for that matter, OLA, one way out of this situation, and that's to fight their way out. There is nothing that's coming from Washington. We have been watching this for 2 years. Things have been getting bad. Duke has always shared with us the food level. In history, in our memory, we have not seen a situation like that. Even Yemen is not blockaded. Yemen is bombarded, and air war has been devastating its infrastructure, its housing, what have you. But there is no total blockade. That the one that you are on top of that, there is this country, as Skal was saying, that's sitting next to Tigray, that is using all its muscle, a country that the West have known to be a dictatorial, autocratic government, trying to kill as many Tigrayans as possible. And here we get Mike Hammer, who has been sitting in Addis Ababa for 2 weeks. And what does he bring? I think I can say even taxpayers' money was wasted here. I'm an American and I can speak that. I think the taxpayer was wasted on Mike Hammer because he came with nothing to press against TDF, to press against the Addis Ababa. He failed to bring them to the table, and we are back to square one. And I'm really sorry to see that back again to school, because by the minute people are dying in Ethiopia, whether it's in Amara region, in Tigray, in Oromia, and soon what we are talking about Tigray and Oromia could also be a real thing in the Amara region as things are developing, as the conflict between the Amara and the federal government is, heightened. Amara leader is being arrested. Amara's finally saying, no, we will not be a tool for Abiy's Megalomanyak. Then something that's as worse as what we have seen could happen to the Amara population. And then we will just be hearing the same story from Washington, D.C., which is no longer a good music to our ears.
Thank you, Faisal. Talking about the issue of U.S. policy on this, on that, some people are attributing to the fact that Ethiopia is now closer to Russia, China, all that. Even the mention of the Ogaden oil we started with. So, Skell, what is your reading on what Abiy is counting on? You have been repeatedly mentioning about his personal attributes, traits in terms of how he's behaving and to what extent he might go. But what about the actors in terms of international community?
I guess if I wanted to look at that through the prism of what Faisal and Duke have been saying, the briefing, I think there are some things that Mike Hammer had done, tried to bring these people together. From what I understand, that he took the WFP plane to Tigray to get the two gentlemen who were representing Tigray, brought them together, and in the deliberation in Djibouti or wherever they met, he was able to kind of show the Ethiopian government that they are absolutely not prepared to sit down and negotiate peace. That much he was able to do. And then in the briefing, and I've not spoken about this, in the briefing that he made to journalists, I think he used some tough languages. With Eritrean troop movement, he said, we're monitoring it, and he said, we're condemning it. Not expression of concern, said that we are not worried. He said, we condemn it. That's a stronger word. And he blamed Eritrea for fueling the conflict in Tigray. He said that Eritrea is fueling the conflict. In something that looks like a warning. He also said that we want to encourage those that might be working with Eritrea or who might have Isaias's ear, they must tell him to stop. Oh, this you could say that or else, something like or else is there, that he must stop. We condemn his action. He's fueling the conflict, and those who are able to talk to him should tell him that he must stop. His action had caused tremendous suffering for Ethiopians, Tigrayans, Afars, and Amhara. They have suffered greatly. So in that respect, I think it's a stronger position. We will see what happens, but I think that is quite a stronger language that I've been hearing from the Americans. And speaking about what probably made Abiy himself, what prompted him to say that the Americans dictated to the peace, the statement on peace to the Tigrayans is probably this language. I don't know what he told his emissaries, but that's probably what it is. I don't really know what's going on in Abiy's mind. But at the same time, in the same week that he antagonizes the Chinese by revoking their license, And at the same time, he accuses the Americans, and which side he is on, what strategy he is following is just unfathomable to me. If you are really thinking in strategic terms, you don't want to fight with both the Chinese and the Americans, except that maybe now the American oil companies or energy companies are lining up to replace the Chinese. So there is a lot of confusion, and that's vintage Abiy. He is not a strategic thinker. With regard to the human rights report, let me say that that their legal findings in the report, the legal findings point out to what might happen. It might be extended, and I don't know why Abiy, after this report, actually blamed the Tigrayans and blamed the OLA on almost an equal footing. Why he really wants to fight with the international organizations, I just can't understand. He could simply say, just like the Tigrayans said, that we will look into this and we will correct our behavior in the future. He could do that. Why he has to pick a fight with an international organization of headed by three people, one from China, one from Sri Lanka, one from the United States? Why he wants to fight with them, I don't understand. These are experts. They have nothing against Ethiopia. They're just doing their job. Why really you want to fight with experts, with China, with America, with everything, with Tigray? It simply tells me what I've always said, that he has lost his bearing. The man is not really in control of himself at this point in time. But Abiy being Abiy, you can't save Abiy from Abiy. This human rights report would probably continue. It might be the experts might be able to continue their work for a number of reasons. Number one, they say that large killings in Tigray, in Oromia, and Afar remain uninvestigated. They did not have time, but large-scale killings have occurred that deserve to be investigated. They have also pointed out that arbitrary arrest is commonplace in Ethiopia, that Tigrayans and others are simply languishing in prison for no reason. This is human rights violation, requires more investigation. They have also raised the issue of Eritrean refugees in Ethiopia, that there will be refugee violations of refugee law that they have not quite investigated in this case, but that's something that might, of course, need investigation in the future. The airstrikes, they have been occurring, and this is mentioned in the report, in the areas that require investigation. The airstrikes are going on. They have pounded a number of places, even this week and during the first iteration of this war. That has not been investigated, and therefore it must be investigated. And finally, why this might be renewed. What the reference to hate speech, attacking and dehumanizing ethnic groups, they say it is a key indicator of future atrocity crimes. One of the things that I liked about this is that the fact that you find, based on their methodology, the methodology that they adopted is one thing, but to warn the world that there is still hate language, hate speech, unconstrained by anything, all the way from the prime minister, from his advisor, to the regional administrator, who is now the head of the speaker of the upper house of the parliament. The speech that they use, and they inspire others to use, is going to get the key indicators, they say, of future atrocity crimes, and it doesn't show any sign of abating. That is probably what would force the hands of the European Union and others, because the violations have occurred under 4 or 5 laws. One is the human rights laws, where they actually spell to the areas such as the right to life, the right to be free from arbitrary arrest and detention and all that. All of this negative and positive liberties that were violated are already cataloged. But the international criminal law that was violated, the killings, it is continuing. So they might renew this and more budget and more personnel. Then what I said at the beginning, this is probably the tip of the iceberg. We might be able to get a larger sense of it if this continues.
Great, thank you, Iskel. So let's go to the final part. Shortly, your final thoughts. Faisal, final thoughts for the day.
Yeah, I think we need to emphasize pressuring and at least throwing some light on the removal of the blockade. I have a hunch that talks and negotiations would be going back and forth. Meanwhile, people would be dying like flies. The US and the West has the legal as well as political and military tools to do something about that. That's why a little bit I'm not as kind to Mike Hammer as my colleague Skial was. I honestly was very disappointed for him to be sitting there for 2 weeks. Yes, Eritrea's focus is one thing, and we know there are many issues and many factors that contribute to focusing on Eritrea, including the big invasion that it is planning, and I welcome that. But I think none matches the war of starvation that has been placed on the people of Tigray. And for too long, how long is too long? That is the question. And for them to take that as a normal situation where people will have no services, where the director of the World Health Organization at the tip of international career and professional cannot send $150 to his family members to just dramatize. I mean, this is something that you can make stories and classical writings of Dickenian kind of stories. I mean, how long does the world will watch? I'm putting political issues aside. How long is the world really? And here is Samantha Powers quoting the perpetrator is Gondar is not feeling the blockade of food and services. Bahirdar is not feeling the blockade. Makala is feeling. And for Samantha Powers to quote the guy who is causing the blockade as if he finally revealed humanitarian words, it's shame on her, to be honest with you. This week, that hit me in the guts, especially to that thing to come from her, whose background I know, her work I know very well, how she worked in the Sudan and what have you, and have even, common friends she may not know, So for me, the priority is let some solution be found for removal of and the report mentioned de facto blockade. Germany didn't succeed to blockade some of the European countries in the Second World War. Tigray is blockaded. Abiy would do the same thing to Gondar and Bahirdar if they continue their conflict with him. This guy is very dangerous. It never happened in the African history, as far as I know, probably in the 1900s in the Dutch war, I'm not sure. But in modern African history, this total blockade didn't happen. Probably Biafra was a little bit close, but it was not a blockade in Biafra. So what we see is a human new phenomenon that the West seems to be taking with ease. So for him to not even mention the US plan to tackle the blockade, that's my priority. I think everything else can wait. I think hostility cessation can easily be encouraged and found, and he can go back to Djibouti and get one more chance. But the blockade is what's bleeding the people of Tigray, and it may happen to Oromia, it might happen to the Amara region, and I think that should be focused by the United States and friends of Ethiopia. And these people we are talking are not aliens. They are Ethiopians. They are Ethiopia's core population, historically, socially, culturally. So for people like Samantha Power and Blinken to just ignore a 2-year-old blockade. What do they think? What is going on in their mind as to how these people live? What does Samantha Power think when she thinks of the Tigrayan mother, how she makes the day, the 24 hours of the day? And now we are suspecting that Abiy may even be negotiating with the USAID to sell the Oromia produced wheat in exchange for US dollars so that they don't buy the Ukrainian wheat, in which case he can easily get access to USAID cash in exchange for his wheat. So to say, you don't have to buy from Ukraine, you can buy from here. I think the US State Department is teetering on a very dangerous line. They are aware of United Arab Emirates' role, they're ally. They are aware of Turkey's role, they are ally. They have never raised or said a word. They have never used their good offices to at least cool the bombardment of civilians through drones by their, by what they can influence and what they can do. Very disappointing as far as I'm concerned what the US has been doing.
So thank you, Pascal. I was showing on the screen what you mentioned. Samantha Power is the author of A Problem from Hell, and it's about genocide. She talks about America and the age of genocide. And what you mentioned in her Twitter from 2 days ago is something that many people are reacting to. And on the Biafra, actually, the Ethiopian media, state media, was broadcasting this week Tigray as Biafra. So they seem to be now in the open in terms of what they want to do with Tigray and what they are doing. Duke, your final thoughts for the day?
Yeah, just to piggyback a little bit on what Faisal was saying, he's absolutely right. The idea that the West and the United States specifically is once again backing a regime against the people that it's persecuting is something that we've done for years and years and years. I don't know why we haven't learned our lesson. It's never worked for us. It's never worked long term. The Arab Spring, we watched so many US-backed authoritarians come down. Their people brought them down because they ignored the people for too long. They persecuted the people. But we stuck with them because they helped us out with counterterrorism, or they helped us out with stability, or they said they introduced some sort of little reforms, liberalization that we wanted to see, the economic or otherwise. And so we decided that we would back the regime. That has been our posture on foreign policy that has been so costly to everybody around the world that we've backed a tyrant over, but also to the United States. We have not done well pursuing this strategy, and we're pursuing it again. And I would love to see somebody in Congress, a policymaker, a congressman, a congresswoman, a senator, to have an ounce of the courage that it takes for somebody to survive right now for 1 week in Tigray. You won't see it. If any of their children were over there, of course we would have, this whole thing would be settled. We would actually be able to figure out which side we're on. But it is this repeated idea that if we back the government, everything will be okay. We wonder why nobody likes us around the world. It's because the government that we stuck with has been thrown out, and now we're dealing with a new government that we tried to suppress before they took over. That's the situation that we find ourselves in all over the world, and it's a horrible strategy. And the starvation, the blockade, if we can do something, if we can break the blockade, Mike Hammerhead, if he was going to make peace while he was there, it would have been fantastic. Of course, that was going to be a horrible job. But if he wasn't going to be able to make peace, he should have at least broken the blockade, gotten trucks in. Last time he was there, they got gas through. This time he should have broken the blockade. If you do that, then that sucks the air out of the conflict, that removes the drivers out of the conflict. You will find that you can get to a negotiated settlement easier, if you can talk Eritrea into it, if you can talk the Ethiopian government to stop attacking, then you can get to it. But just one more thing that I wanted to say. This area along the border with Eritrea, not only is it not getting aid right now, it is being subjected, most likely, we don't know what's going on there because it has been isolated from the face of the earth for the past 22 months. But we can imagine the most terrible things that we found out about for the past, that we've been finding out about for the past almost 2 years, that they're happening again. These areas are the last places where you will find the communities of the Yoruba. You'll find other ethnic minorities, the Kanawha, both live on this area that's right by the border of Eritrea. And nobody is doing anything for them. When the American ambassador after 9/11 went to the Yoruba community, and it was right after the 9/11, he told this story that they said, what can we do for you? How can we help? How can we help America? The fact that he has done nothing, absolutely nothing. He Tibor, I forget his last name, for goodness sakes, but he has done nothing to advocate for this people that are going to be the idea of having a culture, a civilization, having a society is a very difficult thing to see right now when you're scattered through one IDP camp to another, where they're in concentration camps in Western Tigray. And what are we doing about it? Absolutely nothing. We're doing nothing to help the civilians of Tigray right now. Maybe behind the scenes, we're pushing on them, but they know we're pushing on them to open the blockade, but they know they can ignore us because they've been ignoring that kind of language for the past 22 months. So it's very disappointing to see what's going on. It's very disappointing to see America's posture in this. I hope very much that it changes. I hope that somebody wakes up and understands what is going on here. Tigray will be around for a lot longer than the Prosperity Party.
Thank you, Duke. Asgel, your final thoughts for the day.
Yeah, I think the international community cannot resolve the Ethiopian issue. I do not expect the international community to open the siege or break the siege. I do not expect them to do that. How are they going to do that? How are they going to force the Ethiopian government? Are they going to take their militaries there and then force the Ethiopian government? They could add more sanctions to it, but that's going to take a long time. So the international community expresses concern. The United States, all that, they are actually after their own national interest. They pursue their own national interest. Within the context of pursuing their own national interest, conducting their own foreign policy, they would probably try to use the arsenals of diplomacy to try to cajole the Ethiopian government, push it, nudge it into doing the right thing. They're not going to go beyond that. Absolutely not. They're not going to do anything like that. So what Samantha Power is saying is awful. Nobody's going to condone that. But the United States government cannot do anything to end this war or to end the siege or to do anything in that area, because everything that they do, they look at through the prism of the United States national interest. And after Somalia, I don't think the United States is going to do anything that resembles humanitarian intervention in Ethiopia. So they are going to try to nudge, push, cajole, kowtow before Abiy to have him do the right thing. So that is where I leave as far as what the international community is going to do. Abiy, on the other hand, is fighting an eschatological war. This is the end for him. He must win. If he doesn't win, like he told his military personnel, if he doesn't win this war, he wouldn't survive. As a human being, his government would not survive, and in his view, Ethiopia might not even survive. So this is the war to end all wars in Ethiopia for Abiy. This is how he sees it. He's not going to sit down with anybody to make peace. He's not going to do that. He doesn't have the equipment to do that. He's not a man of principle. He cannot do that. I have said on this on this panel a number of times. This war that we see playing out in the battlefields, Abiy fights it in his own mind. It begins there. In his mind, he is fighting a war with Tigrayans because he wants to survive as a human being. This is personal to him. It's not Ethiopia's national interest. It's not reason. It's not diplomacy. It's not anything. It's about him. And he is fighting against himself. He is always telling that they're going to kill me. The Tigray is going to kill me. It's not about Ethiopia. Forget about that. He says they're going to kill me. So he's going to fight it out to try to survive. And his thinking is, and I'll say this about Biafra and I'll finish. His thinking is that we can exhaust Tigray. It doesn't matter if 6 million people died. It doesn't matter to him. And he says, we can starve them to death, all of them. Ethiopia could throw 10 million people to the line of fire in Tigray. It doesn't matter. Why? Because out of 120 million people, he could have 10 million people killed and will still have 110 million people to rule over. He is willing to do that. Abiy is willing to do that. If anybody hears me within Ethiopia or outside Ethiopia, or if my word matters, this is him. This is what he's going to do. There is no negotiation. There is no reason. There is no rationality that would convince this man to go to the negotiating table and this will end this war. He's not going to do it. It's an eschatological war for him. If the Ethiopians are now talking about the Biafran war and the Biafran model, that is exactly what he wants to do. What happened in Biafra? After 2.5 years of fighting, after almost 3 years of fighting, the siege or the blockade on Biafra ended up killing 2 million people, Igbo people. 2 million died of starvation, not of the war, of starvation. After 2 million people died, Ojukwu fled to Ivory Coast and his deputy surrendered under the idea of no victor, no vanquished. Surrendered to the federal government, and that is how it ended. And that is what Abiy is looking at. If the Ethiopian media is talking about the Biafran war, that is exactly what they want to do. They want to starve Tigray to death. The international community is not going to do anything. Abiy is not going to let up. The only way this would prevent the starvation to death of 6 million people is for the TDF to triumph and other opposition forces to triumph over evil that is sitting in Addis Ababa. I think they're on their way. They're well on their way because even Ethiopian militaries are now refusing to fight. Abiy has fired 240 276 Amhara middle-level officers, accusing them of leaking intelligence to Tigray that led to their ignominious defeat. Look, after firing 121 colonels, 81 lieutenant colonels, 300 majors from the Ethiopian army who were Tigrayans, and now after firing Amharas from the Ethiopian army, how are you going to win a war? How are you going to prosecute a war after undercutting yourself? So this is not going to end up in the corridors of negotiations. This is going to end with a victory in which Abiy's forces are obliterated.
Thank you, Skiel, for that final thought. Gentlemen, it was as usual insightful. Many were following us live now, and we will also be broadcasting this on satellite to the Horn of Africa. It's again, okay, Faisal, you wanna say something?
No, I just wanted to really add that I think it's one way to really depend on the Abiy defeat, which in my opinion is probably the only way that this thing can come to an end. I think very soon you will hear, I think it was Duke or Escal who mentioned, very soon with this United Nations report, you will hear a lot of people in his circle thinking about their families and their priorities. War crimes are not really an easy thing for diplomats and for people of high ranking. Generals will be thinking differently than what they have. Abiy will be deserted. I think the only thing that I want to caution us is for the US to be a cash cow for Abiy. Like I was mentioning, Samantha Power and USAID to negotiate with him and accept to buy wheat from him so that they can infuse this cash that he badly needs. I hope that doesn't happen, and I hope the US just plays a good, as Duke said, a leadership's role. Yeah, it doesn't have a good history in terms of international relations, particularly in Africa, but let's hope that there will be a positive factor for change. Thank you.
Okay, Duke, you wanna?
If I could just add a quick one here. You're right. Mike Hammer is no more going to break the siege than he is going to disarm the TPLF, which was the job that they sent him to do from Addis, supposedly. But what can happen, what he can do, what the United States can do, is to speak clearly about what is happening, why the food isn't getting into Tigray. Say when the government is blocking, when the government blocks a convoy, everybody says, "Oh, the conflict is blocking it." So there is no action. There's no outrage. There's no action. He could speak very plainly about this. He could speak to international partners very plainly about this. I think that it's possible that this message is something that would be more difficult for our allies and for the people who are maybe not supporting Abiy, but the people who are standing back and just watching this play out. That might be more difficult for them to ignore. I think that the US could play a positive role in this. I do agree that it is not something that's going to make sense to some of the policymakers. It is certainly not in line with America's track record on protecting civilians, which does not necessarily exist. So yeah, I agree with you that it's probably unlikely. I do think there are some things that could be done to break the siege.
Okay, thank you once again, gentlemen. We will hopefully see the whole house soon, and we'll be following with all these items there. As always, open agenda. Good night from here.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have been following us live from UMD Media on the weekly show, the H Panel. We'll see you on yet another episode of this program. Please share, subscribe, like our videos, and activate the notification bell so that you get notification or whenever we have a new program. Good night.